Tim Reynolds had always thought of himself as a sensible guy. He wasn't the type to stir the pot or rebel just for kicks. But when he pulled a crisp white envelope from his mailbox and spotted the familiar HOA logo glaring back at him, a knot formed in his stomach. He had a bad feeling his quiet life was about to get messy. Ripping it open, he scanned the text until he hit the line that set his temper ablaze. Your mailbox is deemed excessively ornate and violates the neighborhood's uniform aesthetic. Replace it with an approved model within 14 days to avoid daily fines. Tim snorted. Excessively ornate. He'd shelled out good money for that mailbox. A sleek, Victorian-inspired piece with intricate black ironwork and subtle gold trim. It wasn't some tacky eyesore. It was tasteful, well-made, and matched his house perfectly. He turned to his wife, Sarah, who was glued to her phone on the couch. "They've got to be kidding me," he said, waving the letter. Sarah barely glanced up. "What now?" "The HOA," Tim growled. "They say my mailbox is too fancy. They want it gone." Sarah set her phone down and sighed. "Can't you just switch it out? It's not worth the hassle." Tim stared at her, incredulous. "Not worth it?" "Sarah, they're fining me over a mailbox." "What's next?" "Telling us what color our curtains should be." "Oh wait, they've already got rules for that too." Sarah rubbed her forehead. "I know the HOA's absurd, but do we really need the stress? Just grab a plain one and call it a day." Tim crossed his arms, his resolve hardening. "No chance. This is about principle now." The next morning, Tim marched into the HOA office, where he was met by the frosty gaze of Linda Baxter, the HOA president. If anyone thrived on petty rules, it was Linda. She had a knack for enforcing regulations with a zeal that bordered on glee. "Mr. Reynolds," she said with a tight smile, "I assume you're here about the mailbox issue." Tim slapped the letter onto her desk. "This is insane. My mailbox isn't hurting anyone. It's high quality, well kept, and boosts my home's appeal. How's that a problem?" Linda's lips thinned as she slid a brochure toward him. "Our neighborhood has standards. We can't let residents disrupt the cohesive look with flashy designs. Here's a list of approved mailboxes." Tim skimmed the options, dull, gray metal boxes with zero personality and outrageous price tags. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "So you get to decide what's flashy?" Linda folded her hands, giving him a condescending look. "Mr. Reynolds, rules exist for a reason. Without order, what's to stop someone from putting up, say, a neon orange mailbox with spinning lights? Chaos." Tim leaned in. "Linda, it's a mailbox, not a carnival ride." Her smile didn't budge. "You have until the deadline. Have a nice day." Tim stormed out, determined not to let the HOA steamroll him. If they wanted a fight, he'd give them one. That night, Tim sat on his porch, glaring at the letter in one hand and his mailbox in the other. There had to be a way to flip this back on them. Then, a line in the rules caught his eye. A mailbox should reflect the homeowner's personality within reason. A sly grin spread across his face. If they wanted to play by the book, he'd follow that rule to the hilt. He wasn't just replacing his mailbox. He'd make a statement they couldn't ignore. The next day, he called up his buddy Dave, a retired craftsman with a flair for wild projects. Together, they hatched a plan for the most over-the-top, rule-abiding mailbox imaginable. They sketched designs, gathered supplies, and set up shop in Tim's garage. The result would be a masterpiece, absurd, yet technically legal, leaving the HOA speechless. By day 3, neighbors started noticing. Some stopped to chat, others gawked from their yards. A small crowd gathered as Tim and Dave unveiled their creation, a towering silver throne, decked out with ornate carvings, plush red cushions, and a footrest. At the top sat a fully functional mailbox. A plaque on the front read, "In tribute to HOA Majesty." The reaction was instant: laughter, photos, applause. The best part? Linda happened to be on her morning stroll just as they finished. Her face turned crimson as she stormed over, fists balled. "What is this?" she sputtered. Tim played dumb. "My new mailbox. It reflects my personality, like the rules say. Within reason, of course." Linda's eye twitched. "This is not reasonable." Tim tapped the plaque. "It's functional, secure, and technically a mailbox. Plus, it's got seating. Perfect for when you need to sit and rethink your control issues." Neighbors chuckled as Linda spun around, yanking out her phone. "This isn't over," she hissed, stomping off. Tim smirked. He knew the battle was just heating up, but he was ready, and he had no idea how far Linda would go to crush his rebellion. The Silver Throne mailbox became an instant neighborhood hit. Joggers snapped pics, kids giggled as they biked by, and even the mail carrier gave Tim a thumbs up. It was a triumph of craftsmanship and defiance, and Tim reveled in it, especially knowing it was driving Linda Baxter up the wall. The next morning, as he sipped coffee on his porch, Linda approached with 2 HOA board members in tow, clipboards in hand, glaring at the throne like it was a personal insult. "Mr. Reynolds," Linda snapped, "this is unacceptable. We sent you a notice, and you've escalated this." Tim leaned back, feigning shock. "Escalated? Linda, I followed the rules. It's functional and reflects my personality. Want a demo?" One board member, a jittery guy named Paul, coughed. "Tim, it's elaborate. More like art than a mailbox, don't you think?" Tim grinned. "It's a statement, and it meets every requirement. Secure, weatherproof, accessible. Check your own guidelines." Linda's grip tightened on her clipboard. "This mocks the HOA." Tim sipped his coffee. "I'd never. I'm just a guy who likes self-expression." Linda thrust a new letter at him. "Starting today, you're fined $100 daily until this monstrosity is gone." Tim skimmed it and whistled. "Bold move. But I'll contest it. You're fining me without a clear rule violation. Good luck in arbitration. HOAs hate legal fees over something this petty." Linda's jaw clenched. She knew he had a point. The HOA relied on compliance through intimidation, not legal battles. "We'll see," she spat, marching off with her minions trailing behind. Tim grinned. Round 1 was his, but Linda wouldn't quit that easily. The next day, a note was taped to Tim's door. An emergency HOA meeting had been called to address his blatant disregard for community standards. Tim wasn't shocked, but what caught him off guard was the flood of support. Neighbors texted him, fed up with the HOA's nonsense. Some had signed a petition against the fines, others just cheered him on. That night, the meeting room was packed, more people than Tim had ever seen. The air buzzed with tension as Linda took the podium, glaring at him. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice icy, "we're here to address a direct attack on our community's integrity. One resident has chosen to mock our standards, threatening the order that keeps our neighborhood pristine." Tim sat back, arms crossed, letting her ramble. "If we allow this," Linda pressed, "what's next? Neon purple houses? Rusted cars and driveways? We must act now." An older woman in the front raised her hand. "Linda, honey, aren't you overreacting? It's just a mailbox, and I think it's kind of fun." Murmurs of agreement spread. Linda's eye twitched again. "This isn't about fun, it's about order." A guy in the back shouted, "Order or tyranny?" Her face flushed. Before she could recover, Tim stood. "Linda, the HOA's supposed to serve us, not rule us. You've turned it into your personal fiefdom. I followed the rules. If you rewrite them just to get me, it's not about standards, it's about your ego." The room buzzed. Linda opened her mouth, but a board member, a no-nonsense woman named Claire, cut in. "Linda, maybe we should rethink this. We don't need a war over this." Linda glared, then forced a smile. "We'll discuss it privately." Meeting adjourned. Tim left with a grin. Linda's grip was slipping. The next day, a local reporter showed up. The mailbox war had gone viral, and the press wanted in. Tim gave an interview, laying out the HOA's absurdity and how it nitpicked homeowners over trivia. The story blew up online, with people nationwide laughing at the saga. Linda, furious, called an emergency board meeting that night. Hours later, a new notice dropped. All mailboxes now had to match the HOA's approved design, effective immediately. Tim shook his head. It was a desperate power grab, but Linda had misstepped. HOA bylaws required a community vote for big changes like this, and she'd skipped it. Tim dialed his lawyer, Mike, a pro at HOA disputes. "She's toast," Mike said, chuckling. "No vote, no enforcement. We'll challenge it, demand proof of the vote. If they can't show it, we escalate to the county HOA board." Tim smirked. This was his ace. He fired off an email to Linda and the board, CCing neighbors, calling out the illegal rule change. Responses poured in. Support, screenshots of bylaws proving him right. The neighborhood buzzed. People were done with Linda's reign. She shot back, claiming emergency powers, but Tim demanded meeting minutes and vote records. She had none. That night, a board member, Tom, called. Tim, some of us didn't even know about this rule until it was done. Linda's losing it. Tim saw his chance. Then let's fix it. The next day, he and a crew of homeowners drafted a no-confidence petition against Linda. Signatures piled up fast. Linda countered with a final threat, legal action and liens for noncompliance. But the crowd at the next meeting wasn't scared. They shouted her down, demanding proof of her vote. Tom and Claire admitted she'd acted solo. Tim held up the petition. Linda, we're done with your games. This has enough signatures to oust you. Her face paled. She'd lost. A week later, the vote booted Linda by a landslide. Tom took over as interim president, axing the mailbox rule and all fines. The silver throne stood tall, a symbol of triumph. That evening, Sarah sat with Tim on the porch. I can't believe you toppled the HOA president over a mailbox, she said, shaking her head. Tim laughed. It was never just the mailbox. It was about pushing back. She smirked. So, you keeping that ridiculous thing? Tim patted the throne. It's a legend now. The next day, a note from the new board arrived. They'd approved his mailbox as a neighborhood art piece. Tim chuckled. Sometimes, standing firm against petty rules could spark real change, and that was worth more than any silver throne.